It's a pleasure to be here. This is my very first hobnob, at least to be the moderator. And so I am now pleased to be here and pleased to introduce to you first Haley Barbour. After serving 2 consecutive terms as governor of Mississippi, including 2 years as the chairman of the Republican Governors Association, Haley Barbour joined counsel at the law firm Butler Snow, LLP, in Ridgeland, where he specializes in economic and business development. Our next panelist, Burns Strider. Burns Strider, a native of Grenada, Mississippi, is a political, nonprofit, and government relations consultant in Washington, D.C. Strider is co-founder and principal at the Eliason Group and co-founder and president of the American Values Network. He was senior advisor and director of faith and values outreach to Hillary Clinton in her 2008 presidential campaign. Our next panelist, Joe Nossoff. Joe Nossoff grew up in Clarksdale, where he graduated from Lee Academy in 1987. He attended the University of Mississippi, earning both undergraduate and master's degrees in accounting. He later graduated from the University of Mississippi School of Law and also obtained an LLM degree in taxation from the University of Florida. Joe has practiced law in the Jackson area for nearly 20 years. During this time, he has served on boards in various charitable organizations in the metro area. Joe graduated from the Mississippi Economic Council's Leadership Mississippi program in 1999 and was recognized in 2001 by the Mississippi Business Journal as one of the top 40 under 40 businessmen in Mississippi. In January of 2004, Governor Haley Barbour appointed Joe to serve as his chief counsel, where he served until November 2006, when Governor Barbour named him campaign manager for his re-election campaign. Also today, Bobby Moak. Bobby Moak was elected to the Mississippi House of Representatives in his first run for political office in 1983 and served as that chamber's first chairman of the Gaming Committee. Moak is credited with shepherding into law the 800-foot rule, which allowed casinos to move 800 feet onshore, revitalizing the Mississippi Gulf Coast gaming industry after Hurricane Katrina. All right, now it's time for questions. We have opening statements first. I told you this is my first time doing Hobnob as a moderator, and we'll start with former Governor Haley Barbour.
They've asked us to talk about the 2016 election. And I will first say to you, anybody that told you last year they knew how this was going to turn out will lie to you about other things. Howard mentioned, I've worked in the White House when Reagan was president. Several months ago, I saw one of my old Reagan White House friends, and he said, "Haley, have you ever seen anything like this?" I said, "Nobody's ever seen anything like this, not in our lifetime." He said, "Yeah, the nominating contest has become so weird, they've had to coin a new term to describe it. Electile dysfunction." And I can't argue with that, and unfortunately Pfizer hadn't come up with anything. Look, why has it been so weird? Why has it been so unprecedented? I think the short answer is people are mad and they're scared. How many of y'all know what Real Clear Politics is? Okay, a lot of you. Real Clear Politics is an aggregator of news. They write some stories, but essentially they're an online, daily news aggregator that, among other things, runs averages of polls every day and have been doing this for a long time. According to Real Clear Politics average, 65% of Americans think the country's on the wrong track. That number's been above 60% for 3 years. It eases up to 70% sometime. And since fewer than 40% of Americans identify themselves as Republicans, this is not just about Republicans who don't like the Obama administration. These are many independents, many Democrats who think the country's going in the wrong direction. And the truth is, they got some good reason. We had a terrific recession, worst recession since the Depression. Yet we've had the weakest recovery after any recession since World War II. 2.1% average annual growth in GDP. When you consider that 3.1% has been the average growth in GDP since World War II, when you consider that the Obama administration's Office of Management and Budget predicted growth in GDP would be 3.9%, when you consider that after the last deep recession that ended in 1982, annual GDP growth averaged more than 4.5% for the 7.5-year period that corresponds to the 7.5 years since this recession ended. Think about what our country would be like if the economy was growing more than twice as fast as it has grown. President Obama is the first president since Herbert Hoover who will have spent his time in office and never had 3% economic growth in any single year. People can't cite those statistics, but they feel it in their own lives. They see it in their own communities. This economy has been great for Wall Street, but on Main Street, I don't have to tell you, you can't tell the difference between the recovery and the recession. People see it in their people trying to get jobs. You know, the administration says how great it is. The unemployment rate has dropped from 10.2% to 5%. What they don't tell you is almost all of that drop in the unemployment rate is because of people who've quit looking for jobs. The administration, every administration's labor department, has what's called the labor participation rate. Simply put, the labor participation rate is the number of adults who are either employed or seeking full-time work. What percentage of Americans? Well, if the labor participation rate was the same as it was when President Obama came into office, 67.3%, unemployment today would be 9.2%, not 5%. The rest of the drop is because of people who've dropped out of the workforce, because by the Labor Department rules, those people don't count as unemployed. They're not working, but because they're not looking, they're not counted as unemployed, which means 80% of the decline in the unemployment rate has been because of people who dropped out of the workforce, not because of people who've gotten jobs. Have there been net job gains? Well, they have. President Obama likes to boast about the fact that he's created 14 million jobs, or nearly 14 million jobs, in 7.5 years. After the last deep recession, 1982, in the same number of months, we created 21 million jobs. Half again more jobs in a workforce that was 20% smaller because of the population gains that have happened. I point out all that not because your constituents or your neighbors or your employees or your bosses can quote those statistics, but to make plain to you, people got a reason to be mad and scared. And the biggest manifestation of that in our party was Donald Trump. Millions of Republicans and Democrats and independents wanted to shoot Washington the bird. And they thought Donald Trump was the greatest, most magnificent middle finger they could imagine. But not just our party. Look at Bernie Sanders. We all thought this would be a cakewalk for Ms. Clinton. Bernie Sanders got 43% of the vote in the Democratic primaries. Interestingly, Donald Trump got 44% of the vote in the Republican primaries. The difference was essentially Clinton was competing against, Sanders was competing against just Clinton. Trump was competing against 16 other people. So I make the point to you, people got a right to be mad. The way it's manifested itself is not what I would choose. And frankly, a lot of Americans are disappointed. We have nominated the two most negatively perceived nominees of the two major parties in at least the history of polling. And I would suspect in the history of the country, we just didn't have polling before the 1930s and 40s. Trump has got a negative image among 61% according to the Real Clear average. Ms. Clinton, 53% according to the Real Clear average. This shows in the vote. So many of Americans don't have anybody they want to vote for. They're trying to decide who they're willing to accept because they want to vote against the other one worse. Since spring, I've been, as I make speeches around the country, making this point. If the election's about Trump, he's going to lose. If the election is about Clinton, she's going to lose. The big difference has been the Clinton campaign has spent the last 6 months trying to make the election about Trump. And Trump has spent the last 6 months trying to make the election about Trump. He's done virtually nothing to try to expand his vote. He plays to his base all the time. Yet, here we are with a pretty close election. And again, if polling is to be believed, and I think pollsters are having a harder time this year than usual, but I accept the polls at face value. 10 days ago, Hillary Clinton was ahead 6.7% in the Real Clear average of 13 polls. This morning, she's ahead 4.4 in the Real Clear average of the same 13 polls. I can't explain that, and I can't tell you that it's right. I can't tell you 6.7 is right or 4.4 is right, or the Los Angeles Times poll that shows Trump ahead is right. I don't know, but I do know this. One of the two of these people is going to be president of the United States come January. And my mama used to say when I was growing up, life's a series of choices. And the choice is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And that's the choice American people are going to have to make. Anybody who has done this a long time, saw William Winter out there, made me feel better about not being the oldest person here. Of course, he made me feel bad about not being the thinnest person here. But historically and normally, when 2/3 of the people think the country's going in the wrong direction, you have a change election. Hillary Clinton has spent this whole campaign trying to make the American people believe Donald Trump is unacceptable change. You may want change, but you don't want that change. Personally, after hearing Ms. Clinton in the primaries against Sanders essentially say she'd be a third term for Obama, and frankly has moved to the left of Obama on a number of issues, if you want change in this election, Hillary Clinton will never be the candidate of change. Hillary Clinton being the candidate of change would be like me being the spokesman for Weight Watchers. Just no credibility whatsoever. So that's the election that we're in presidentially. We got the Senate, we got the House, we got governors. But for openers about the environment, hopefully that's a good start.
But it's very good to see Governor Barber. Governor Winter, good to see you, my fellow Grenada Countyman. Two guys out there, Ross Riley and David Dallas, I was at Delta State with, and seeing them reminds me how much that we're all turning into our daddies. And that's all right. Ross's dad was our dean of students back in the day. Good to see you, Chairman and Chairman. Good to see you. I'm glad to be here. I've been friends now with Hillary for about a decade. And it was 10 years ago that we started, at that time, having a daily devotion. Mainly scripture, sometimes poetry, a lot of readings from great theologians. But I would venture to say that we haven't missed a day in a decade of taking time to read some scripture together and have prayer. And so that's within the reference frame that I know Hillary and have the chance to work with her. Politics is my profession, but every once in a while you have this opportunity, many times in your career, to form lasting friendships. Do I think it's a done deal? I'll put it this way. My dad, who was sheriff of Grenada County, if any of us ever started thinking that we had won the campaign, he would immediately say, son, whoever told you I was winning, I tell you that I'm losing by 20, and get out that door and get to work. And let's go get elected. We'll know election night what happens. It's close out there, and there's a lot of things wobbling around, and it's just a totally surreal election. It's hard to read what's going to happen. I mean, look at what happened over the months in the in the Republican primary first, and then in the Democratic primary. And it's because, as Haley said, that we have a country that's frightened about the future, they're scared, and they're angry that government's not engaging in a way they want it to engage, that it's broken, that it's not getting anything done for them. And I hear that everywhere I go, with everyone I talk to, everyone I sit with, no matter which one they're voting for. You know, Trump's running as the ultimate outsider. He hates the Democratic Party. He hates the Republican Party. He hates the media. He's loud. He's self-proclaimed billionaire from New York who is somehow an outsider. He would say, be damned with those who disagree. I can fix this, and I will fix it my way. We have a Secretary of State and former U.S. Senator, former First Lady on the other side, who loves policy to a point of talking you to death and back sometimes about how to solve a problem. She has a history as senator of working on compromise, and she does. And her work with Mississippi and Louisiana during Katrina was rather profound and deep and on the record. She would say, as an insider, which she doesn't deny, that being president would allow me the opportunity to achieve the goals I've been working on most of my life. And because I'm an insider, I know the way out. I know the way to get out. So you got two folks that are pretty different in style and personality and on the issues. And then you've got this whole, this whole cultural phenomena, maybe it's a moral phenomena going on where, I have two boys, one of them's still 12, one's 14, and I feel like I need a counselor with us during each presidential debate, just to talk about language, to talk about how you talk to each other, to talk about labels and some of the topics that have come up in these debates. I grew up with a debate as a sacred thing, watching with my father, and I've never missed one. I mean, they were really sacred in my home, and these debates, watching with my son, sometimes I cringe. I don't think a United States presidential debate should be that way. But that's what we have, and that's what we've been getting. I disagree often and loudly with Republicans, but at the end of the day, they're going to be my friends if they'll accept it. I was thinking about that when I was listening to Governor Bryant speak. I disagree with that guy 4 or 5 times a day, but I'll hug him till I mess his hair up if he'll let me. Well, he's a friend. He's a good guy. And that's not what we're getting right now in our national politics. And in my opinion, where we are is looking also what happens past Election Day. It's the one who wins going to immediately start working to pull us together, lead us forward. It's the person that loses. And y'all, this is crucial. I could take you to several history professors I had at Delta State that could talk in great detail about this. The loser is as important as the winner, because it's the loser in the American tradition that concedes and calls the country to come together around the new leadership. And that's always happened. And we face the chance where we're going to have a guy who's not willing to do that. And as citizens, we're all going to have to work hard, whoever wins, whatever happens, to bring our country back together. I think in Mississippi, I think there's enormous opportunities. I enjoyed listening to Governor Bryant at the good news going on. I think depending on who wins, I see opportunity in solar. I think that we should study and look at the whole vertical integration and where your businesses fit and how our government helps enhance the solar industry, because you could see millions and millions of dollars put into that. I think that I've always wanted Mississippi to get together and work to find its own Silicon Valley. The main streets and the storefronts of the little towns around here are just where these tech people are moving and where they're going. They're looking for places like this. And we sit in a state with Mississippi State, Ole Miss, USM, who all three are terribly strong and good universities and well known. For the first time in my 16 years in D.C., Governor Barber, I tell someone I'm from Mississippi, and often the first question I get is State or Ole Miss. I mean, the universities have really outdone themselves in the nation and in drawing attention and stature to themselves, and we should be very proud of that. And they have the ability to join if helped and aided and empowered by our leadership in Jackson to help build a technology corridor where people want to come, and including venture capitalism. Lastly, and just putting it straight up, is that we need to focus on education, and that's been said a million times, a million ways. One guy said, as I heard, that I want to see all of our children in Mississippi educated in a way that I know they can be. There's no reason Mississippi can't have the finest education for all kids, including poor and rural, in the nation. That was in 1967, and Governor Winter said that. And he's been saying it ever since. And I come home or I look at the news and I still see the same old thing, where we're fighting back and forth over the level of money being spent. And we have that crowd of people out there saying you can't throw money at education, we're overspending, we're wasting money on it. I always think about this old guy, evangelical from way back, named G.K. Chesterton, who was a social critic of the day, and he never took a cigar out of his mouth, always smoking a cigar. He was from England, and he ran across a reporter one day on the streets over there. He had a cigar, and the reporter said, "Dr. Chesterton, when do you ever recognize the fact you may be smoking too many cigars?" And he looked at her and said, "When you see two of them in my mouth at the same time." And I think we are far from having access in our support and investment in public education. And I hope that we'll continue to make that fight and move in that direction. So Election Day is going to be quite the night. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being on Twitter and seeing what everyone in Mississippi is saying. Watching Governor Barber, deal with it on TV. I'm going to find where you are, Governor, and watch. And let's remember that as that night goes on, that the next day we're one country and we're going to move forward together. Thank you. Thank you, Howard, and thank y'all for having me home.
Let me just say how honored I am to be with Governor Barber, Howard, and Burns, and Bobby. It's good to see Governor Winter here. And I can't think of Governor Winter and and people talking about their fathers, about thinking about my dad, somebody came up to me when I walked in the door and said they knew my father, and the first thing I said was, wait, let me guess. He was a lot smaller and cooler guy than me, wasn't he? You know, and I could tell they agreed with me, but they didn't want to. But he was close to Governor Winter, and it's always good to see him. I've got to say, I worked for Governor Barber. I was his chief counsel. And people used to always ask me, what was it like working for Governor Barber? And in 30 seconds, I can tell you one example. When I had been working there for about 6 months, my father-in-law in Laurel had a mild stroke. And so I went to the governor one day when he was coming in from something, and I said, Governor, would you mind writing my father-in-law a note? He had a mild stroke. I think he's going to be okay, but I bet he'd appreciate it. He said, sure, what's his name? And I said, Bill. And so I handed him the card, the pen, and he just bent over, there was a table there, and wrote it out without hesitation and handed it to me. And he said, what do you think about that? And I looked at it. It just said, it said, Dear Bill, if Joe was my son-in-law, I'd have a stroke too. So, I didn't know if he was just that quick on his feet or if that was the 50th time he had written a note like that. But it made my father-in-law feel better than any medical treatment I think he'd ever gotten. Look, I just want to mention a couple of things, and I'm going to try to be quick. Number one, I just want to say as a way of a reminder, because I think it's interesting to think about. We've already talked about the primary process, but one thing we didn't talk about is what were we hearing a year ago? Do y'all remember? A year ago, what we were hearing was the Republicans were going to fix the election, right? That the, quote, establishment, and I hate labels, we're going to get behind closed doors, change the rules, do whatever it was going to take to have somebody who got the vote not be the nominee. And I think that people who are part of the Republican Party or conservatives should be proud of the fact that we did exactly what our process says we should do. And that may sound simple, but it's not. Not in the environment that we had. And I will say this, and I'm not an expert on the Democrat part, but, you know, they have super delegates and some other things. And Bernie Sanders, gave Hillary a run for her money. When your rock star is a socialist from Vermont, you know, in my opinion, things have moved a little bit left in your party. So we were happy about the way that worked out. Now, secondly, I want to say this. There hasn't been a lot of talk about the issues. Burns talked a little bit about it, but I mean with our candidates. Governor Barber mentioned the polls. Somebody may have mentioned this. I believe I just saw a Bloomberg poll that had Trump up 2 in Florida. He had things change, and I think if somebody would take his phone away, his polls would just start going up. Or maybe change his Twitter password, one of the two. But anyway, the election obviously has been going back and forth, but we hadn't been talking about policy. I wish we were. Because I'll say this, and I say this with all due respect, that we can get into the details, we can talk about the subjects, but here's the bottom line. We feel confident that we can easily point out if Hillary Clinton gets elected, it's simple. She's going to be against what majority of Mississippians are for. In almost every case. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Taxes, regulation, religious freedom, what doesn't matter. I'm not saying, I think we're right, but the bottom line is this. As far as the Mississippians who elected the supermajority in the legislature, gave us record victories, they're going to be for everything she's against. And I always say in order to vote for Hillary Clinton, you have to believe 3 things. You have to believe government's too small, taxes are too low, and we can't do anything better than we're doing right now. If you don't believe those three things, I don't know how you can cast a vote for Hillary Clinton. So I wish we were talking about the issues. But, you know, and we still may get into that, although it's getting closer to the end of the time. The other thing I just want to say is this. You know, President Obama has done a good job of kind of mocking the people who have denounced some of the things Donald Trump has said but still supported. I mean, he's been out wearing us out about that, acting like it's a matter of courage. My first thought was he must have been asleep during impeachment. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but my recollection is either every Democrat or almost everyone both disagreed, denounced what Bill Clinton did, but supported it. So let's don't get tricked into thinking that anybody in this race is perfect. Nobody. And it's true, Hillary Clinton's got more experience, but I'm no foreign policy expert, but if you go through the world, just think about the countries. North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt. You can't find a lot of places where things are going that much better. So, you know, as party chairman, we try to be an advocate. So I clearly, that's my opinion, but I believe that for Mississippians, it's not that tough of a choice. But you know, it's been a fascinating campaign so far, and it's been a frustrating campaign, to be honest, because you can imagine if your first race of your life is for President of the United States, it would be pretty tough. And so, you know, we could go on and talk about it forever, but I just want to, you know, try to be quick and wrap up in my opening statement with that, but just say this. As Burns said, you know, we do all have to work together afterwards, no matter what happens. I was kind of amused by all the hoopla around Trump's answer at the debate and about whether he was going to respect the result. Had the question been, are you going to respect the result if the election goes smoothly and there are no problems or no fraud? Of course he should have said yes. But unless he's Nostradamus, if somebody just says, are you going to respect the election results, I don't know how anybody can know what the election results are going to be like. And so, you know, there's been much made out of that, but I think it's something that, you know, the press never covers a plane that lands safely, and that's what we know. We don't come whine about it, but that's what we know. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Last time, 4 years ago, MEC was nice enough to have, I think Ricky Cole and I debated. I did not have as a tag team partner the most politically knowledgeable person in the world, so that helps out. But I appreciate being here. I appreciate y'all and look forward to questions when we get to them. Thank you.
Just for a quick moment, I think national elections in Mississippi are more than about national elections. We, on the Democratic side, understand this state's been 12, 14 points going to the red. We see that. We're going to be interested to see what happens in 2 weeks and if those numbers tighten up a little bit. Because elections are not only about this one, but they're also about the next one. And that'll put us on a path to look to 2017, a path to look to 2019. One thing that Joseph did mention is that we've not heard much about policy, and I think that's what all of us in the room just about grew up with, and that is we we like to hear policy to the extent that it is boring from our presidential candidates, and we've not really got that. And it's because of what Governor Barber has said, because finally the Republican nominee has been, to a large degree, making this process about him rather than a lot of other things such as Republican Party policy. Joe and I did an event last night with Atmos Energy with some of their folks who had come into town, and we were happy to do that. And one of the questions that was asked, is there an opportunity for a third party after this election? And that's a question that some of us are pondering because of what our cousins across the pond do, and in South America and elsewhere. And so that's to be seen, but it also is one other point, and I'll get on with the questions, is that Burns brought up. I was in the legislature 32 years, Democratic leader there, and because Mr. Faith and Values is here, and I chaired the gaming committee in the Mississippi House, we're proud to be at the same table today. But it was, it all worked out. And the Baptists miss their opportunity, Governor, that's all I can say. And but anyway, I know many of you in the room, and through the years we have worked together politically. We have been apart politically on issues. But at the end of the issue and the end of the day, we all came together and worked together for something that was good for our communities and our state. And that's what needs to happen at the end of this election, whatever the outcome is going to be. And Joe's brought it up, and as an aside, I have been somewhat amused at all of the talking heads on television tell me what Mr. Trump thought he was saying when he answered that question at the last debate. So that's been pretty interesting, and I think every one of the talking heads, and Joe too, has probably answered that better than their candidate did. So I'm ready for your questions.
All right, first question, and this will be to Governor Barber here to address initially. This campaign has been unusual, to say the least, as we have a long-term political in Secretary Clinton and a very non-traditional political in Mr. Trump. How has that changed the dynamics of politics in America?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that that is not the only thing. I think the environment in which the campaign is being waged led to having a newcomer, led to having somebody that had never run for office. And I think people that try to judge how somebody who's never run, or as Joe said, runs the first time, will actually do is a little bit harder than dealing with somebody that's run and run and run. I mean, Ms. Clinton has been in the public eye for almost 30 years. She's very well known. People have opinions of her that are not going to change much. Trump has been a TV star, but people have moved around more about him. And I think both her campaign has been designed to say this guy's not trustworthy. You may want change, but not this change. But the other thing is he has made it harder for people to vote for him. And I think that is perhaps a product of not ever having run before, but I don't think so. I just think once you get to be 70 and your ego and your self-image as such is not going to change. And I think that has been a big part of what we've seen from Trump, not trying to appeal to the people that aren't already for him. But I think it's more to it, Howard, than just that one of them is a veteran politician and the other is a newcomer.
Pretty much spot on. The Trump election spends some days doing anything but really campaigning for president. Veering off in all kind of directions to obsess over some comment by a third party somewhere or something. But I do agree, he's an entertainer. He's been in public for years. We all have known him for various TV shows and antics and such. But yeah, I think what we see is what we get. I think he's set in his ways, and there's no dream of anything different. Republicans have been pushing the reset button every 2 weeks for over a year, and they still keep getting the same thing.
I guess I have a little bit of a different take. And let me just say, the first time I've been around Mr. Trump a couple of times, not much, but the first time was very successful because it was when he was here for our fundraiser, and I had just introduced, or was about to introduce Nigel Farage, which I was telling Mr. Trump was pronounced like garage, and who was from England, of course, the one that led the charge for Britain to withdraw from the European Union. And when I heard, being a redneck from Clarksdale, when I heard the word Brexit, I thought it was some kind of new deer bait you put out a few times a year. Didn't really know what it was. But anyway, I was asking Mr. Trump, or trying to ask him if he wanted to go first or second. And after I got through with my explanation, he turned to the person to his left and he said, I don't have any idea what he's talking about. So it was a really successful first interaction. It got better after that, but I do think everybody's right that somebody gets set in their ways. I do think the most important thing for a successful politician is to have somebody who will tell them the truth and have somebody they'll listen to. And I think if you don't have that, then you're going to do things that you think are helpful, but they don't, and nobody else does either. Other thing I'd add is this. I think there are a couple of practical differences this made in the environment. One is Hillary Clinton's got a 25-year, since Bill Clinton ran for president, national organization to tap into. That's a big deal. People criticize Donald Trump about ground game and grassroots. Lord, literally 25-year, that's impressive. And so that's why the RNC has had to do that. Secondly, as Governor Barber mentioned, even though it doesn't explain everything, nobody's more seasoned, more professional as a politician than Hillary Clinton. I'll admit that. She's very smart as well. But the thing that has helped Donald Trump is that he, as they've said, there's no question that this year was a year, in my opinion, where somebody smart, there was a good governor, I think, that, let's say, a Jeb Bush had no chance. The attitude of changing government, not really even much ideologically based, just to change it, just to talk in a way that you weren't used to hearing people talk. I think that's been, and seeing the difference between Hillary Clinton and how she handled things, and now Donald Trump. So anyway, I think that it's been fascinating to watch, and I think maybe Mr. Trump believed that the things that helped him win the primary were enough to win the general. I think he realizes now they have, it's a little bit different animal, and so we'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks. But those are my thoughts on the main differences.
I think Governor Barber was pretty much on there, followed up by Burns. One of the things that Joe brought up was a ground game that Ms. Clinton can tap into, and I think that's right. And I think if you look at these two different parties, one thing the Clinton campaign did immediately after the convention was bring in and tap into the Sanders group immediately after that election. And from what little privy I have to that, it looks like that has worked, that's actually coming together for her benefit. On the other side, I think that had the Republican nominee been able to tap into the 16 other ground games of the persons that he beat through the primary system, that would be a great benefit to him today, and at least the trajectory polling that we're seeing that is in Ms. Clinton's favor would not be so much there today, as it were. So I think there's one thing that we have to bring away from this. Number one, sometimes we need somebody in the House to bring some moderation, and I think Mr. Trump has been doing better this last week or two, and I think some of that credit goes to the new hire of his campaign manager from New York, the lady from New York. I don't think any of us who follow politics are undecided. I think we know who we want to vote for, and a lot of people that we know are voting to keep somebody out of the White House rather than put somebody in the White House, and that's a completely different tone that many of us in this room have had during our lifetimes. So I think when he brought the woman in from New York to be his new campaign manager, maybe he's listening a little bit. I can tell that he's toned it down, and I think that does better in public appearances. On our side of the aisle, we've got the woman, and we're with her, and we think she tones it down too, and does exactly what we need as a leader.
And since we only have one question left, and the time is running out, and you guys have answered pretty briefly the questions, I'm going to try to condense 3 questions into one here. And that is, at times through this campaign, both in the primaries and now in the general election, the rhetoric has been unpleasant, as you mentioned. Do you think this has been one of the roughest campaigns in history? If so, what do you think this will mean for future political campaigns, and a candidate mentioning this far out before the election that it is rigged? What impact will that have, Governor Barber?
Howard, I think campaigns ought to be about issues. I think this campaign would be a much better and quite different campaign if it's about issues, but it hadn't been. It's been both because they're so negatively perceived, think that the way to win is for people to vote against the other person. It would be a lot better campaign if both candidates were running on, this is what I would do about the problems that make 65% of you think our country's going in the wrong direction. Here's what I do about it. Here's what I think the results would be. Here's why I think the results would be better. And I hope you'll vote for that. But most of what's being said is saying, here's my opponent, and I hope you'll vote against that. And I hope that we get this out of our system this year. I hope that most Americans say, I don't ever want to see another campaign like that. And I hope we'll have a president who will lead, because frankly, as somebody who's around Washington a lot, the country has to have a president who will lead, and today we don't have one. I mean, we talk about the nastiness of the campaign. I was flabbergasted in the last couple of days when the President of the United States said Marco Rubio was a con artist in Florida. I can't imagine Ronald Reagan saying that. I can't imagine Bill Clinton saying that. The next president has got to want to work with Congress. It's going to be a pretty close Congress, one way or the other. Probably the president will have at least one house that's not of the same party, regardless of who the president is. But we are the most polarized we have been in my lifetime. And unusually, we are polarized while we're at parity. Somebody mentioned the trajectory of the polling. Actually, the trajectory of the polling is, in the last 10 days, Trump has been from behind 6.7 to being from behind 4.4. Inexplicable to me. I mean, I can't tell you why. Maybe some Republicans are coming home, whatever. But the polling has been like this throughout. But whoever wins is going to have a whole lot of putting America back together, and not just from this campaign, though this campaign has made it far worse, in my opinion.
It's a good question, and this is what I want to say to it. Some of it's some repetition. Again, I think any time, I learned about politics and government. I learned how to love my country when I was as a child, and mainly because of my father's leadership and Governor Winters. showing me politics, introducing me to people, and just sitting down in front of the TV and watching while my dad talked to me about it. And now I sit down with my boys who are deeply interested in politics. Of course, you take a neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where everybody works in government or on K Street or as a political consultant, and you have like fourth graders having deep discussions around politics up there. But I sit down to talk to my kids, and we end up talking about basic moral character education, not to call people names, not to lie, not to create things that aren't true and start pushing them out there, and then just the words that are used. I do think that it's one historians will judge extremely negatively, and I hate that, and it hurts me personally for being for being active in this campaign and knowing how much better it can be and knowing how much better the American people are than what we're having to listen to right now.
I'll just say quickly, first of all, as Governor Barber said, it may seem when you watch TV or when you pay attention that Donald Trump's not doing too well. I just saw a report on the early voting from Florida. In 2012, 730,000 people have voted as of right now. This year, 1.2 million have voted, almost double, and they have more Republicans that have voted than Democrats. That doesn't mean Trump's going to win Florida, but it's better than if it weren't that. As far as undecided voters, and I told Bobby this last night, I think this year, unfortunately, I don't think there are any undecided voters between the candidates. I think people are trying to decide whether to vote or not, some of them, because they aren't as fired up or excited in a positive way as they used to. As far as the rancor and whether the talk has been worse, I have to be honest, and maybe I have a little bit different view. I remember during the 2004 campaign, I believe, and and then after that, many very well-known mainstream people said that George Bush lied, not had faulty intelligence, but lied to get the country into a war where thousands of people died. I got to be honest with you, I don't know what could be worse than saying that somebody lied to get us intentionally into a war. Whether somebody disagreed with it, whether somebody thought the intelligence should have been better. I know Hillary Clinton said she believed the intelligence was right, thought Saddam had nuclear weapons. The point is, so I'm not sure it's been, I think it's maybe been a little bit more fantastical, as they say, with Donald Trump involved, but I don't think it's been worse. Finally, I just want to say this, and I think we found that in our races here. I think it's going to be up to us in terms of how things are after the election, whether it's unworkable and government's frozen because of a lack of ability to work it together, or whether it's going to be. When I was chief counsel for Governor Barber, I used to work with Bobby on all kinds of things, and we obviously weren't on the same side. And I think that's not only our elected officials, but we are going to have to demand that of whoever gets elected. That running the country is more important than making a point or even obviously political parties.
First of all, off your point a second, but Joseph brought it up about the early voting that's going on in Florida. It's true that many Republicans have voted, but what we also see in Florida and Ohio, but especially in Florida, 12% more Democrats have voted earlier than they did in the election 4 years ago. Now, that doesn't spell who's going to win the election, But as Democrats, we think that folks who are going to vote early in those states, or Republicans, probably know who they're voting for. And so that's going to be interesting to watch. It would really be interesting to see if you could have those numbers, if they're doing something on that post-election. That would really be interesting to watch. The other thing about also, and it kind of goes into the rigged question, if Mr. Trump wins, I don't believe it's going to be anybody's White House but Mr. Trump's. I think if Ms. Clinton wins, it's going to be nobody's White House but Ms. Clinton. I don't think she's going to be a continuation of what President Barack Obama, just to move her in and he leave. I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason is because there was a spirited debate during the Democratic congressional primaries. There was a spirited debate during the Republican primaries. And whoever wins has to make it their White House, because in 40 years, dynamics have changed. And as Governor Barber has said many times up here today, people are mad. Whoever wins, it is a huge job to bring those people together. And not all of that will be under an Obama administration. Not all of that will be under the Republican leadership either. It's going to be a new White House, whoever takes it, because they've got a job that is larger than political parties. If we are to see things better in the next 4 or the next 8 years. And personally, I'm kind of following our Secretary of State here in Mississippi. You know, the elections are fair. I've won by them and I've lost by them. And on the day after, I've said, that's it, we're done. We're in or we're out. I don't think there is mass hysteria in rigging elections, and I certainly don't like that type of red meat type talk that's out there. But that's just one of the things. But the thing that will bring us together in 2 weeks is, I think if you're like me, we will all be happy that it's over and that it's finally done.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Please give our panelists a round of applause. You all did excellent.
Thank you so much, Howard. Wasn't this a great panel? Let's thank them one more time. We really appreciate them being here.